everybody, to Talking the Territories, the brand new hot segment from Wrestling with the 80s that I stole completely from my Wrestling with the Truth YouTube channel, but I felt it was more appropriate for the 80s channel, so it's now been ported over there. If you ever checked out the original episode that was on there, you'll recognize two of my guests from that episode, Ted the Hillbilly Heel from The Heel Truth, and Will Gray from Botch Spots and Chair Shots. But we've got a newbie into the fold as well. It's Taylor from Jaded Wrestling. Gentlemen, how are we doing? Are you excited about Talking the Territories tonight?
Let's go.
I don't think there's ever a moment in my life where I'm not excited to talk about wrestling, but more specifically, territory wrestling.
Ted, how about you?
Ted, you fall asleep on us?
No, I'm speechless. I mean, I love this stuff. It's right in my wheelhouse. It's something that I sound intelligent about when I'm talking about it.
You always sound intelligent, my friend. Well, before we get going, I want to give you guys a chance, before we lose any viewers, I want you to talk about what you do for a living, where people can find you, because very shortly we're going to get into the territory we're talking about tonight, and that is going to be Jim Crockett Promotions. And I know Ted is salivating to talk about this territory, so I'm going to let you go first, Ted. Promote your stuff.
Ted the Hillbilly Heel Truth Podcast, a critically acclaimed, award-winning #1 podcast in Antarctica. You can find me on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeart, wherever you get your audio listening pleasure. Also, you can run over on the YouTube. Okay, we got a little YouTube channel over there. I think it's at Ted Hillbilly Heel or something, but Heel Truth Podcast, you can put it in there. Your Google machine, find it there, and mainly just shorts, some fun stuff, some stuff promoting the episodes. And also, I still haven't found out who did it, but somebody started me an IMDb page. I'm even on there now. All that stuff, not on social media. You can reach me, heeltruthpodcast@gmail.com. I love to read reviews out, emails, talk wrestling. That's about it.
Nice. Taylor, you want to go next?
Yeah. I got a podcast with my co-host Will Fitch. It's called Jaded Wrestling, but I am really thinking that the only promotion I need is being here in the middle of the brain trust with you three. I kind of feel a little bit out of place here, but listen, we got Mr. Wrestling with the 80s, we got Mr. Heel, and we got Mr. Indie Wrestling right here, all in one group. I don't know what to do with myself. I'm just happy to be here, guys.
We'll call you Mr. Hot Take. How about that?
I'll take it. There
we go. All right, Will, you finish it off, my friend.
Well, as always, thank you, first and foremost, and Ted and Taylor and everybody. But if you're interested in finding my shenanigans elsewhere, check my link tree at The Will Gray. You'll find all things Botch Spots and Chair Shots, Rivet City Radio. You'll find all my dirt sheet writing with the Sportster, Last Word on Sports, pro wrestling stories, all of that nonsense at The Will Gray.
Beautiful. And I highly suggest viewers and listeners check out all of these gentlemen's work, because it's fantastic stuff. Love it. They are on my must-listen list every week, and can't wait for every new episode from these guys. So I will vouch for this crew right now. So, all right. Now let's get going. Let's talk the territories. And I didn't think there was any better a territory to talk about in our debut episode than Jim Crockett Promotions. For anybody who is not aware of what Jim Crockett Promotions was, this is a promotion based in the Mid-Atlantic territory of the NWA Alliance, the National Wrestling Alliance. We're talking in, Ted, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like the Charlotte area, the North Carolina area, South Carolina, those hotbeds of wrestling. Did it port over? It was Georgia as well, a little bit of that. I think that they poured over to as well.
Yeah, in Virginia, a little bit up. When you see their logo back in the original Mid-Atlantic, it included Virginia and Maryland, but
right.
Every now and then they would go up to Baltimore. But Virginia, Norfolk, Richmond, Roanoke, they had big following there. They had Georgia, but really Georgia was, Ole and Jim Barnett, but still they did a lot of cross-promotional stuff with them. All that, but mainly the Carolinas and Virginia there. That was it. It was just wonderful.
Yeah, and if you want to, if you're still confused about that, if you want to think about the territory that Ric Flair is synonymous with, I guess is your best way to go.
That's
That
the
T
best way to put it.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
TBS wrestling, TBS 605
yeah.
wrestling. That's what you want to think about when you think about this. Originally, the Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling broadcast is what it was, and it became World Championship Wrestling. But overall, just think of that nice, warm, cozy feeling of a Saturday night at 605. Turn on that TBS and enjoying yourself some phenomenal wrestling and some phenomenal promos. So, this is the territory that we're going to talk about. We're not just going to talk about Ric Flair. We're going to talk about memories about the whole thing. And that's what I wanted to start off with. Now I know for Taylor and Will, I mean, obviously you were watching this live back in the day when it happened, but I know Will, you're just like a guy that deep dives on all this old school stuff. And I know Taylor, credit to you, you're trying to learn about this old school stuff and you're getting into the conversations with all that. So I'm going to start with you, actually, Taylor, because you start us off. Now, in your deep dive so far, what do you find that you're noticing about the, the Mid Atlantic Jim Crockett Promotions territory that strikes you the most about it?
So a couple weeks ago, I put out an episode where I just pretty much abolished tag team wrestling. Like I throw it in the trash. I tried to get rid of it. I tried to get it out of here. And to be honest, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to turn tail on my take. I'm not going to sit here and climb off the mountain. But I will say that this was a different time for tag team wrestling. Don't you feel like tag team wrestling was better when people worked together? Don't you feel like we miss the days of Dan Kernodle and Scott McGee? What's going on, guys? Like, can we get back to the old days when people had great names and they worked together as a team? There's only like 3 tag teams in the world today that you see out and you're like, those guys probably drank beer together. But back then, I guarantee you Dan Kernodle was putting them down with every one of his tag team partners. Also, what a name, dude. I don't know if I can cuss on this show, BC. I'm sorry, but that name is just so incredible that I just can't get over it. Like, honestly, he might be my new favorite wrestler. Like, I just watched like a season of this today because I was like, man, these guys are gonna destroy me because they're way too smart when it comes to this stuff. So I powerhouse like a season of Mid Atlantic, and I'll tell you what, I got 3 new favorite wrestlers in my top 5 right away. Just a land full of beefy men just putting it down. You know what I mean? I don't make them like they used to. No more tag team wrestling like this. No more beefy men. I swear, Oli has my body. Like, it's weird. Like, honestly, like, yeah, I was watching. I was like, yo, that's what I look like. And like, people were confident back then. Ricky came out here wearing whitey tighties in half these matches, and ain't nobody.
Yeah,
it's crazy. It's crazy. It's a wild, wild west out here, and I'm absolutely here for it. I think that's the reason why this enlightenment journey has been so fun, because I mean, truthfully, like, I've seen Freebird promos and I've seen promos from Sergeant Slaughter, but I've never been able to see the random day promos. You know what I mean? And I watched some of those Sergeant Slaughter promos earlier, and I'm just like, God, dude, this dude is great. Yeah. He's so much better than I even thought of. And he's just attacking poor little Bob Caudle and his little itty bitty old man glasses with his hunchback. And he's just like, listen here, boy, your name's Jack now. And I'm just like, poor Bob. He doesn't deserve this. He's been through the ringer already. You know what I mean? This guy don't deserve this. It's just a magical time in wrestling. I honestly know why Ted got so mad when I put down tag team wrestling the other day now.
Yes.
It makes sense. I get why you were so angry about it. Like, for a while, I was like, what's he so mad about? Like, the Viking Raiders are terrible. Why do we care so much if we just get rid of all tag team wrestling? But then we go
and see, that's the thing. You know, you not only Slaughter, and that's the other thing. Besides the 605, if that's what anybody listening to this, if you've never watched it, you can start at the 605, but even go back further in Mid-Atlantic when Roddy Piper was on there and he was a face for a while. And you had a great tag team in Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat.
Oh, yeah.
And just and Bob Caudle. Tony Schiavone was asked if they called you back and asked you to go into the WWE Hall of Fame, would you? And he said no. Because he said, Bob Caudle is not in there. And there's no way I deserve to go in there before Bob Caudle. Love Bob Caudle. Had Bob that long, skinny microphone with that cord on it.
One of the things I found out during my research for this, speaking of TV and that 605 Supercast, because everybody thinks about Black Saturday and Vince McMahon coming down south buying out the TV deals. I found out. You guys ready for this? Some shadiness started in the Crockett promotion. They expanded to syndicated TV in New York before Vince came down south. So they struck first in that war. And I didn't find that out till today. Like, they moved to syndicated TV in that territory as early as like 1976 in some places. So that means Crockett struck first up there. I always thought Vince came down south first, and I was wrong this whole time.
No,
Yeah.
he did. It was the war of northern aggression. It's the same thing we still call the Civil War down here. You know, it's all that. No, don't believe that. Don't believe that, Will. It's all false. It's all fake. Fake news. Something Meltzer reported. It was probably Meltzer reported.
That's why I've never heard it before in my 38
well,
years.
That's
I
it.
had no idea, right?
We don't talk about that. No, it was all Vince's fault. No.
We won't mention them running shows in Toronto and in New York as well, and things like that. Working with the Tunnies, yeah.
Jim Crockett was a good man. Okay, that's all I'll say.
I love it. Now, Taylor, I got to ask you. Now we know that Dan Kernodle is your favorite wrestler, but what are your thoughts on Don Kernodle? Did you like him?
Oh no! I wrote it as Dan. It auto-corrected in my phone. It's not my fault. It's the stupid Android's fault. If I would have grabbed the iPhone instead of the Android, this wouldn't have happened.
And of course,
fair, dude.
Of course, your second favorite is Rocky Kernodle.
Yeah. I don't know if he's taken over for Ron Bass though yet.
Yeah,
that's a whole lot of man. I'll tell you what, dude's got a couple thighs on him, don't he?
Big boy.
Yeah. That's the kind of dude that when he gets in a fight in the bar, he automatically breaks a bottle. He doesn't even wait to see how violent it's gonna get. Like the first thing somebody says, he's just like, "Shh, you really want to do this?" It's like, nah, man, I didn't know we were going to that extreme. I don't really want to do this. Like,
0 to 100.
I thought I was going to get knocked out and I was going to go home. Like, I didn't know you were going to cut my face up. Like, this is the thing I make my money with. I can't be out here, like, having beer bottle fights in the bar. You know what I mean? Like, you got to relax. He pulls his cowboy hat off. He goes, it's going to get serious.
You want some good Ron Bass stuff? Go check out Championship Wrestling from Florida because he was a dominant fixture there. Yeah. Good feud with Barry Windham, a young Barry Windham.
I love a cowboy. I really love a cowboy gimmick. There's a lot of fun gimmicks in this that aren't as fun nowadays. Like the Hangman Adam Page could never do that for me. You know what I mean? He can never do a Ron Bass for me. It's just never going to work. He doesn't have those thighs. He just needs, that's the important part of a cowboy. Like think about Stan Hansen. Dude had some beef on him because he's a rancher. Them ranchers ain't no skinny little boys no more.
AJ Kazana. This is the perfect chance for me to throw in an NWA reference right now. It's AJ Kazana. That dude looks like he could have came from Crockett Promotion. Like big, thick Southern boy with a cowboy hat, wrestles in cowboy boots. AJ Kazana is made for he would have been made for JCP.
Even that Thrillbilly Silas guy is another guy. Too.
Silas Mason, absolutely. Yeah.
You could see him in that. But yeah, Taylor, you mentioned a couple things. I'm going to get Will to jump in on this here. So you mentioned two things that I think Jim Crockett Promotions, and especially the Mid-Atlantic territory, became very famous for tag team wrestling and promos because there was a lot of that on their shows. And actually, originally the Mid-Atlantic territory, majority of their matches were tag team matches. It wasn't until the early 80s when you had Flair and those guys, Steamboat, that were just putting on these phenomenal singles matches that they realized this is going to draw some serious money for us. But that's when it switched over. And Ted's mentioned this a lot of times. It wasn't even about the matches half the time on that 605 show that you'd see. It was the promo. It was the build-up to all these feuds, and it did such a phenomenal job. So, Will, take us down your thoughts on just the effect of the tag team scene and the promos on both Mid-Atlantic and the Jim Crockett Promotions.
The first thing I think of when you say tag team wrestling and Jim Crockett Promotions, I immediately think Jim Cornette. And a lot of my memories and a lot of the stuff I go to is going to go to that 84 to 86, 87 range. And when you think about that, you go to like, and one of the things me and Taylor were talking about before we hit the live button was the scaffold match in StarCast 1986. It wasn't the main event, but it probably should have been because it was Nikita Koloff and Ric Flair title versus title in the main event. And it had to follow the Road Warriors and Midnight in the scaffold match. It was the match with the shoot fall. Big Bubba Rogers was there. But when you think about the tag team wrestling and the promos together, it almost is synonymous with that Jim Cornette, because the things that I remember most is Dusty holding the pencil and Flair holding the belt. And you think about how arguably right now, you think about everybody talks about Dom and they talk about MJF and the quality of heels in wrestling. Go back to that 84 to 87 push in JCP, and it was like a hotbed for some of the biggest, hottest heels in wrestling, not just Flair, not just Dusty, but you look at everything. We were talking about it already, the Horsemen, Midnight, Road Warriors, Rock and Roll. Like, you think about the who's who and on everybody's Mount Rushmore of tag team wrestling, and they all wrestled in this territory from 1984 to 1988.
Yeah.
Like everybody who held the belt at some point wrestled in that territory then. So when you look at the big thing of tag team wrestling, they may have, in the big gambit, have had the most stacked tag team division of all time at that very end tail end run of JCP.
For sure, for sure. Ted, did you want to touch on the promos and just the importance of the promos within that territory?
Yeah, because again, we got to remember back then, most of the time you were paying to be on TV. You weren't having these $1 billion TV deals. So TV, I think David Crockett, heard an interview with him. They had to pay TBS so much, and then they got a little slice of the advertisement. And all their money was on house shows, the live events. So you had to get people to want to come out and see the show. And what do we even have now? I mean, we've got commercials, but whenever a movie comes out, what do the stars do? They make the Tonight Show circuit. They go around and they promote the movie to get you to go into the theater. And it was the same thing back then. Those promos were to build the storylines, to make you believe that there was these grudge feuds, that you just had to go and see what was going to happen at that show. And that's why, every now and then, even if it wasn't a big event, they would switch a title belt just so you would say, oh gosh, I need to go the next time something happens, because there may be a title switch or anything like that. Those promos just drew you in. And, basically the TV show was like a big infomercial, like we see on TV that is wanting you to buy something. Every now and then they would have a beat down, or maybe two main eventers in a match, but primarily it was, enhancement talent and just all those promo segment, promo. And it was just gold.
It really was. And we got to see some of the greatest promo guys in the business run through that territory. I mean, you're talking about guys like Flair, Arn, Tully, JJ Dillon, Paul Ellering, you mentioned Sergeant Slaughter Taylor, just so many, Magnum T.A. even.
Magnum needs to be thrown in there.
Yeah, and of course the greatest in them all, you could argue, Dusty Rhodes, right? So I mean, we saw the creme de la creme as far as promos, and I mean, we had some great folks that did great promo work in the WWF and stuff like that. A Hogan's going to draw you in, a Savage is going to draw you in, but I mean, all of these people. I couldn't imagine being a fan in that territory at the time. They're going to talk me. You want to talk about getting talked into a seat? That's what those guys were doing. I will go down a rabbit hole of just 1985, 86 promos from all these guys. And I'm just amazed at just watching just how much passion, how much intensity, how much fire there was in the fans, how much they were into this.
This was the last generation of kayfabe. This was the last generation of people weren't smart to the business unless they were already in the business. So when they were going into that ring and selling these promos, the fans in the 70s and the 80s still, a lot of times, especially in the smaller markets, the whole "it's still real to me, damn it," that was still the thing, though, even as late as 86 or 87. You know what I mean? Like 84, 85 especially, a lot of people still hadn't gotten wind of the fact that it was all a work. So not only were they putting butts in seats with these promos, but the fans legitimately bought them as being legitimate. And that's one of the missing elements in, like a lost art of Americana is keeping kayfabe. And this was one of the last generations to do that.
I have a kind of weird thought. So obviously I didn't see this live. You guys did. Did you know at the time what you were watching? Like, did you know when you watched it that this was going to be talked about 30 years later? Like when you saw Dusty Rhodes cut a promo, were you like, okay, this dude might be the best person we've ever seen? Like, you know what I mean? Like we watch wrestlers now, and a lot of times that GOAT word gets thrown around, or man, this guy is so good. He might be the best one to ever touch a mic, MJF, or LA Knight right now is doing big things. But like I was just wondering if like when you guys were watching this in the 80s, if you were like, golly, dude, he's so much better than anybody we've ever seen. Because I mean, still now people look back and say Ric Flair's the best person to ever touch the mic, or Dusty Rhodes is one of the best people to ever touch a mic. And like, I just don't know. I don't know that I've ever watched something like this live and been able to soak it in and say, all right, look, I'm seeing history right now.
Yeah, well, to be honest, as a teenager, I guess I was one of those that just lived in the moment, and I didn't think it could get any better. So I was already, and just, I think a lot of my generation, when I grew up, I didn't think they'd ever be a quarterback as good as Roger Staubach of the Dallas Cowboys, and stuff like that. So yeah, when I saw it, I was like, no, there can't. And again, that was my bias. I watched some WWF, but those promos, when Arn and Tully went up there, Arn said, we had maybe a minute and a half, and we had to bear, we had Bobby Heenan with us. So we would say one or two sentences, whereas there were some of them promos, they'd go on for 5 minutes, easy. And when I saw it, I just thought, man, it can't get no better than this. And even at the time, I thought this is never going to end. And then Turner buys it out, and then all the other stuff. And I'm like, what happened? Because I just thought this was great.
Yeah, I agree. You're watching this and this is something special, although you're not thinking like, oh wow, okay, is this going to go down in history as the greatest thing? But you're watching these guys and you're thinking to yourself, this can't get any better. Like, this is insane. Like, to watch a Ric Flair go off and throwing his shoes and stripping down and showing you his diamond rings and all this, like, you're thinking this guy's a madman, right? Hearing an Arn Anderson with the intensity that he has, and just he's the complete opposite of Flair, and he just sums it all up, and just with this intensity where it brings you back in there. All these different people, it's just, you're watching something special. Now, do you think like this is going to be the greatest ever? I don't know, but for me, I was just sitting there just mesmerized, going, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool. This is it. It's something I talk about with today's product, is that I don't get lost in the product enough anymore. And I don't think you have to be a kid in order to do that. I think you just have to have a good product going on. The Bloodline does that for me sometimes. A guy like MJF will do that for me sometimes, but it's not all the time. But it was all the time with these people. You're like, my God, you could have somebody in your ear going, this is fake, and you're still going like, no, this isn't, because it was just that good.
And I just want to say that real quick, and sorry to interrupt, but
you're good.
Me and my dad were like that. I was the kid, I was the teenager who was holding on to Santa Claus is real. I wanted to believe so bad. And my dad would be like, I looked at that face of him. Now, if I hit somebody with a chair like that, they ain't going to get back up, But then yet he would get right into the match and be up off the couch. And I'm like, make up your mind, Daddy. Is it fake or not?
Yeah.
I think it might be like a little bit of a gift and a curse though too, because nowadays we have so much stuff that's right in our hands. So if we see something that's truly phenomenal, we can watch it over and over and over again until we're tired of it. Like example, last year Ric Flair had that promo build to his last match, and that opening promo, that first one he put out, I must have watched it 150 times, mainly because I was TikToking it and like messing with the audio, but also like I watched it like 200 times because it's incredible. Yes. And I don't think that like there was an access to be like, okay, I can rewatch this promo over and over again in the middle of the 80s. I could be wrong, but like I don't know, I wasn't there. But
I'll tell you, there was the VCR. And
okay, all right. Well, I mean, like live. That's what I
yeah,
mean, like live.
yeah.
Like when it
Mhm.
happens, but like now it's like, okay, Ric Flair just cut the promo of the year. Let me just watch this 150 times and soak it
Yeah.
all in. And things like that don't get old. So that's why I feel like this is such a special era, because you see stuff that you don't typically see nowadays, because maybe people thought it was realer back then and maybe people wouldn't believe in it now. I don't really know what the reason is, but there's a lot of styles of wrestling that you just don't see anymore in this.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something special in its own right too. You know, there is a lot of things about this era that make it special, but I think that like the ability to not have everything so immediate made it more special too. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So that's just my thoughts on it anyway.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, for sure. Will, I'll bring you back in here. Do you have a favorite promo from that time period? Is there one that sticks out in your head that you're like, this is my go-to that I'm repeating in the shower in the morning or anything like that?
Honestly, and this is going to sound like a really generic phoning it in kind of question, but it's right here at the forefront of what's going on in wrestling today, and that's Dusty's hard time promo leading up from the 85 to 86 push.
I don't have to say a lot more about the way I feel about Ric Flair. No respect, no honor. There is no honor among thieves in the first place. He put hard times on Dusty Rhodes and his family. You don't know what hard times are, Daddy. Hard times are when the textile workers around this country are out of work and got 4 or 5 kids and can't pay their wages, can't buy their food. Hard times are when the auto workers are out of work and they tell them go home. And hard times are when a man has worked at a job 30 years. 30 years. They give him a watch, kick him in the butt, and say, hey, a computer took your place, Daddy. That's hard time. That's hard time. And Ric Flair, you put hard times on this country by taking Dusty Rhodes out. That's hard time. And we all had hard times together. I admit I don't look like the athlete of the day supposed to look. My belly's just a little big, my hind is just a little big, but brother, I am bad and they know I'm bad.
Because everything that went with that storyline at the time, I've been saying it since he got pinned at WrestleMania and he came out and did that first promo afterwards. I said, this is his dad's story. And then he started eating L's, and then he started to look hurt, and then he's playing a lot of the same angles that his dad did in that fight from down under. And then you watch his documentary, and they even go as far as into that with the symbolism of like the lone dredge through the desert and being alone, and like everything they talk about Dusty having to struggle with, finding himself through that point of his career. Like, I feel like that promo was a catalyst to what gave us maybe one of the best. We were just talking about it too in a previous episode with Ted. You know, big shout out for Ted's show with the storyline that told. It was damn near 3 years by the time it was all said and done or whatever. And it all started with that promo where he was explaining that Ric Flair had never had a hard day in his life. You know, and that 1 3-minute promo or whatever it was that was a pre-tape, which I would found out later he shot in 1 take.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like they pretty much told him, like, you know, go, and he went in 1 take, shot a 3-minute promo without missing a beat. And when you think about it, and like I said, it's kind of like I'm phoning it in because everybody's like, you could go into the Flair Wahoo trade in the late 70s, you could go into the tirades, but I think once again when you talk about this, like you want to tell somebody like that quintessential Jim Crockett Promotions promo, it's got to be Dusty Rhodes' Hard Times.
I agree. Yeah, that would probably be the one that sticks for me the most. I mean, there's so many of them, but that Hard Times, it just there's so much emotion in that.
The
It's just
studio board standing in front of the JCP logo
Yeah.
with the podiums and like the way they did the studio style interviews back in the day, and kind of feeding off what you guys were talking about earlier with the you know, the anchorman and the interviewers like getting shaken up. Some of these guys weren't smart to the business because they were coming over from the fucking news station, guys. Like they thought these guys were real beefcakes that were going to rip them in half. So some of that shaking and timberness was legitimate shaking and timberness because they didn't know what they got themselves into. They were just, you know, 2 weeks ago, they were talking about Roger Staubach and those guys on the Dallas Cowboys. And now they've got Flair and Wahoo ready to rip each other apart, and they're standing in the middle of it like they're Jiffy peanut butter.
Yeah. Ted, how about yourself?
Well, even though that was a great promo, pulling for the Horsemen and the Heels, I always wanted to see Dusty get beat up. So, that wasn't.
That's what we
There was
do,
just
Ted. That's me and you. In the brain trust, that's who you and I represent, is like that yin and yang.
so so many of Flair's, just so many. The limousine ride, the spilt liquor that he did on Buddy Landell, that one was just great. Yes, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, and I live in the biggest house, on the biggest hill on the side of town. That one. But then just some little ones that I still go back to that just stick out in my mind was when Arn Anderson would say something, and then he would look at him, and he would say, "I don't mean to toot my own horn, but toot toot," just something like that.
This man right here had a lot to do with it. Arn Anderson, I think it was over you that this confrontation began.
Well, Bob Caudle, I'm going to be real brief. I don't want to come out here and blow my own horn. I don't want to toot my own horn, but toot, toot.
Or when Pistol Pez Watley, turned to Shasta Watley and turned the heel on, and he would go off on Jimmy Valiant and call him an undercover hillbilly. I just loved that. I just thought that was so funny.
Taylor, what about you? Anything that stands out from that whole promo battle era?
Ted sent me about 100 promos the other day, and I made it through all of them. So I have a couple here that I really, really like. I want to do a Ric Flair one too, since everybody's getting down on the Ric Flair train. In this one, he says something along the lines of, "My shoes are so expensive, you could live in them." And it just like, I don't know what it is about the line, but it always makes me laugh. It's just like, dude, there's nobody more arrogant than that. It's like, look, you could live in this shoe. That's how expensive it is. And then like he sent me a handful of Cornette promos the other day. And like people of a younger generation don't realize how funny he is. Like, it's not even that he's a great promo. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's an incredible promo. But at one of the points in this promo, he goes, "I'm a good person. I do charity. I bought the song We Are the World." Like, and he's just rambling. And it's just like, dude, this dude is so smart. And like, it's dumb. It's dumb how quick he is. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, that's such a funny line that a comedian would have wrote that he just rattled off of his brain. And that's the thing I think that makes your Dusty and your Ric Flair's promos so relevant for a long generation is there's always these lines that are like, golly, dude, like, how did you come up with that? Like with Dusty, I always go back to Bull of the Woods. There's no other promo that matches Bull of the Woods because he says like, I had to feel on my face to see if my eyes were still on my head. And I'm just like, dude, there is just nothing better than this. Like, it's incredible. Like, and you said like one taking it. Come on, dude. How are you that good? You know what I mean? To see if my ears were still on my face. You know, it's just crazy. It's crazy to think that he just rattles them off for fun. You know what I mean? Well, not for fun. He obviously did it as a job, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, here's this. I can do this. And it's just like, dude, you're way too good at this. It's the same with you guys. You all know too much.
Cornette gives a lot of shit to the guys nowadays that have the comedic roles. He's like, you gotta have it serious. It's gotta mean something. You know, you're degrading the business. And he goes on his whole, you're like, you're killing the business, like all of that. But look at what he did all through the 80s. He had a one-liner in every promo he did. You know what I mean? Like, he had that real dry sense of humor mixed in with everything he said, talking about guys sucking wind so hard that the first 3 rows die of oxygen deprivation. Like, Cornette was the kind of guy that would say like that. And you're like, at first, you're like, what did he just... Oh. Like, it kind of like, he's too smart. That phrase, too smart for his own good. You're like, that's Jimmy Cornette. Yeah. Like,
yeah, I think with Cornette too, like his big thing was it was just these quick, snappy lines that he's throwing in there, and he's more so. I don't like the comedy in the ring. It's okay outside on the promo because you're dicing and slicing somebody, but when you're doing it in the ring, that's the problem. But yeah, he was so quick-witted; it was just unbelievable. We've been dancing around a couple of main characters here talking about this, and I wanted to talk about Dusty first, then we'll get on to Flair and the Horsemen and that stuff. But Dusty Rhodes, obviously he came in, I think it was 84 when he arrived on the scene, and I mean, he'd been in and out and stuff like that, but he was down in Florida and then came up to JCP. and he took over booking from Ole Anderson. And that's when you really saw a change in the product. Not that the product was bad with Ole at the helm, but it was just different with Ole. It was a more, I guess, seriousness to it, a more intensity, and then Dusty brought in the showbiz side of things. But that's when everything really seemed to take off for JCP, and you have the just the unbelievable run from 85 to 87, and you tie that in with Dusty, Starcade, Great American Bash, and of course the Horsemen, and just the drama that was all involved in those. But looking back on this, and again, Ted, I'll start with you. I mean, obviously, you went from George Scott booking Mid Atlantic to where it was just basically your run of the mill standard wrestling show to Ole getting real intense stuff in there. And I mean, talk about promo guys. Ole doesn't get the credit he deserves half
No.
the time either. What a promo Ole Anderson was from a serious, like, he's like Arn, like you take it seriously, but even scarier, I think, with Ole. But you had that Ole with that intensity stuff, and then Dusty with the glitz and glamour. Is there one over the other that you preferred, Ted?
Yeah, well, both. I mean, just the whole thing. It's hard to choose. I mean, Ole's believability was the whole thing, but like you said, when you get Dusty in there, you started getting some more nuanced storylines. Some more just little things that you noticed that was happening that were actually longer and telling. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but it was just those little details that ended up being there that may have played off, and just how they would interweave everybody in it. Because, like, and I've said this on my show, you got rock and roll and midnight. Then you branch them off, and you got rock and roll against Ole and Arn, and like that, or then the midnight against the Road Warriors. And just everybody, it was like a whole web of people, and they could go off for a couple weeks, feud with somebody else, and then they could still come back, and it was still interchangeable. I think that was a big thing that I noticed with Dusty, just the little nuances and things like that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And now again, Will and Taylor, you guys are coming in looking at it from a past perspective, as opposed to, myself and Ted are seeing it at the time. But you probably notice a difference in the styles as well when you see, like, say, from 81 to 84, it's Ole at the helm versus 85 and on when you got Dusty, booking.
Honestly, when I cut my teeth on what became WCW and what was WCW, was that tail end of it coming into the 90s right before Bischoff took over. Okay. So looking back on it, I remember watching all of Bischoff's run from that 93 through the 01 buyout, that 2000, 2001 invasion. Like, I watched Bischoff's entire reign. As I went back as an adult and watched Dusty, and I think that literally we know it because of his relationship with him. But if it wasn't for Dusty, like, that was that real hard shift with the entertainment side of pro wrestling. He got real heavy with the character stuff. He got real heavy with the storytelling angles. Everybody talks about the Dusty finish, for crying out loud. People who aren't even in the business, can pretty much tell you, it's like, oh, that means that the bad guy tried to cheat and the good guy beat him in the same way. That, like, everybody knows what a Dusty finish is, because that's almost how he finished. Like, he became that guy. So it's like, without a Dusty Rhodes, we would have never gotten an Eric Bischoff. We would have never gotten a Paul Heyman. We would have never gotten some of that really hard twist. You dare say, if Dusty hadn't done some of the stuff he had done between 84 and 87, we would have never had an Attitude Era, because some of the stuff he was doing at the time, he started turning it up to 11 and testing the waters and pushing the limits of what storytelling in pro wrestling had been, because Ole was still very old school. Still carny about it, big top, like, kayfabe is real. We're going to go out there. You're going to beat the shit out of each other. You're going to make it look like a fight. And then in 3 nights, you got to do it all over again in Raleigh. Like, Dusty wanted to make it theater. He wanted it to be like a movie. He wanted his fans to be invested, not just because they wanted to see a fight anymore, but because they had to know if the little guy could beat the big guy.
Yeah. I think Dusty's famous quote was, "We're making movies here," or something. Or
Yeah.
so many years we're going to be making movies. Is
It's
what it was.
cinema,
Yeah.
man. It's cinema.
Yeah, yeah. Taylor, anything to add on that?
Okay, so in the middle of that, I got distracted. It's because Don Kernodle is fighting with Ricky Steamboat in the background of this. Like, I looked over, and Don Kernodle and Ricky Steamboat are just ripping each other's shirts off at the end segment of the show, and like the credits are rolling. And Don Kernodle, man, is it Dan or Don?
Don.
Oh yeah, I got it right this time. Don Kernodle is just hammering Ricky Steamboat. I'm so sorry, Will. That was such a dickhead move of me to get distracted. But I'm telling you, this Kernodle fella. Whew, he is on another level, dude. Like, I couldn't even hear his promo, and I was just like, oh, this dude's letting Ricky have it right now. And Ricky's out there in like a Hawaiian punch shirt or some, and Don Kernodle's just like, listen here, brother, this ain't gonna work. That's not how he talks. I know that's not how he talks, but that's how, when the sound's off, that's how I imagine he talks.
Everybody has Hulk Hogan's voice when you watch a promo without volume.
I'm gonna change it now. I don't want him to be Hulk. Listen here, buddy. But I'm telling you, man, he's the truth. Who was booking in '82?
That would have been Ole at that point.
All right, I like Ole. I'm all in. If he's gonna push Don Kernodle, then I'm down with Ole. I'm riding with Ole. That's my boy. Also, like, before I forget, and I don't know if we're gonna get to this, what a banger of a theme song for Mid-Atlantic.
Oh yes, yeah.
Holy, holy. Every time it comes on, I just start going like this.
Mm-hmm.
Raise the roof, man. Do people still raise the roof? Is that a dead thing?
We can make it one.
I'll tell you something, Taylor. Like my wife, when she says, "What do you want to do today? You want to watch some old school wrestling or something like that?" She won't know the name of the territory, but she'll always go, did it.
Yeah.
So good. It's so good.
Stuff.
You only need it's just like, that's the thing we need though. Like, like you think about the old NBA show and they have that great theme song going into NBA tonight. Same with NFL on Monday night. Are you ready for some football? You know what I'm talking about? It's just, you need that theme song to be able to put in the background as you're like, okay, yep, we know what's coming on now. You're in the other room, like making a pot of macaroni and cheese or something. I don't know if this is a macaroni and cheese motion that I'm doing. Can everybody see this? Are we live? And then you hear da-da-da, da-da-da, and you're just like, oh, run. You know what I mean?
Wrestling's on.
This mac and cheese is going to have to wait.
I love it. Love it. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, let's dip our toes into something that, we couldn't avoid the whole times. We were trying to keep Ted from going off on this, but we got to talk about the one and only Four Horsemen. Now, of course, Ric Flair.
Wait, who?
The four guys. I think it was Buddy Landell.
I thought you were talking about that faction with Bailey.
Yeah, you're talking about Bailey and Becky, right?
No.
But of course, Flair had been synonymous with Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling all through the 70s and the 80s. But then all of a sudden, 1985, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, the feud that erupts. Ric Flair's cousins, kayfabe cousins, Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, come in that cage. They all jump Dusty, break that leg, and almost get killed to ride afterwards with the fans. And thus began the Four Horsemen. And then we add Tully Blanchard into the mix just because we weren't good enough. Let's add one of the best mic guys and wrestlers going as well. And then throw JJ on there because we just don't have enough talent on the microphone. But pure magic. And from that day on, it was like somebody lit a match and set that place on fire, because it was just, me and Ted have talked about this many times about how the Horsemen were involved with everything at all times, but it was a way they did it to make sure that everybody else was getting pulled up with them. And it didn't matter if it was Dusty Rhodes, Magnum T.A., Ricky Morton, or even Brad Armstrong. They pulled them up to their level and they made them all-stars. So everybody felt so important, and it was amazing. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the influence of the Four Horsemen and how they changed that territory forever.
This is a Ted thing.
I was just seating because I figured I would let Ted say everything, so that way I could just be like, yeah. What?
No, you go ahead. I'll let y'all go first. That way I won't take up all your time.
I want to go first, Ted. You got way more on this than I do. I'm not trying to do "Are you smarter than a fifth grader" here.
Well, like I said, go ahead, Will.
Oh, I was about to say I'll sound like I'll go ahead and just spit it out. That way Ted can make me sound like I just teed it off for him. I loosened the mayo jar here. When you look at what happened after that point in the cage when they brought everybody together, and this is one of my things. I've been doing it a lot lately, and I think about callbacks. Look at what happened with DX when they brought out the New Age Outlaws in that match. It was in a cage. You know what I mean? When you think about like a lot of stuff, it's always these callbacks. And this one specifically, it echoed throughout wrestling for a long time, not just because of the Four Horsemen, but then you look at things like not too long ago, Tully and Arn are both on AEW TV and they're dropping the four to each other. Like when you talk about long-term storytelling, guys, you're looking at damn near 30, 40 years of it at this point. Taking away from Flair and everybody, when you think about what the Horsemen mean as they transition, you start getting into like the Radicals, Four Horsemen with like your Perry Saturns and your Benoits and your Malenkos, and you start getting into your trading people in and out of it. The Four Horsemen still maintained a powerhouse standing as being one of those like workhorses for your factions. The Bloodline has been one of the best stories for the last 25 years. I'm not taking away from it, but you look at what influence those four men had in 1985 and on. From that point, they're still, even with everything the Bloodline has done, you still can't say that they've completely surpassed what those four men did. And I think Charlotte that night. Like anything, because it echoed so long into wrestling history. Now, Ted, you give us all the dates. It was March 3rd, 1976, 50 miles uphill both ways.
It's just the story building. Arn gets the call to go to Jim Crockett because JYD said, "You look just like Ole." He gets there, and they play this cousin, brother, nephew. It changed from week to week. They were not consistent with it at times, but Arn, just even the little, like, again, the nuances. Arn gets there and says he's going to bring back the Anderson name because Ole had been a babyface for a little bit. Him and Thunderbolt Patterson were tagging, and then Ole is going to side with Arn. And then they're getting with their cousin Rick, and just that promo time of all three of them. And like you said, then Tully gets in there and that angle because, again, Flair was a tweener. He had been feuding with Nikita. He had been more of a babyface. Then it was like, boom, they all turn and they all beat down Dusty. Tully joins. Arn cuts the promo and says, "We're the Four Horsemen." It was built. And then, again, I've preached this on my show. This is the way you start out a heel faction that is dominant. Yes, on TV, they're going to, like I said, they would go out night after night and it would be a draw or they'd lose by disqualification or whatever. But because there was no internet, you didn't know that they were losing on these house shows. But when they got back in the studio, or they would do a jump or beat down on TV and they would cut that promo, again, the importance of that promo and importance of the heel truth, that they could spin it the way they wanted to. You believe nobody could beat these guys, and they held all the gold. They would have all the belts, and that's what Arn said. He said, as long as at least one of them, especially Flair, had that world title, we look like, hey, nobody can beat us. And that's the way you book a heel faction, that they're dominant, at least on TV, to where you can see it in that promo, and they just run down. And then you have the little kink in the armor. Tully and Ole get into it. Luger comes up, and then they're sort of wayward there when Luger turns, but then they get Barry Windham over there on their side. And Barry, I've said this, he was up until the Hogan NWO turn, most magazines and dirt sheet writers consider Barry Windham's heel turn one of the biggest things that ever happened with a babyface since, I guess, Zbyszko on Bruno, and then it was, again, magic, oh God, Barry can't do this. And it was just story beat after story beat. And like I said, they were just intertwined with everybody in those promos. You would hear Arn talking about his TV title, and yes, he was talking about Dusty, and then he would, like I said, he would throw in Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner, and you're like, oh man, they must be good if Arn's calling them out. So
Yep.
it was just so great, and we're just missing a lot of that today, especially with a dominant heel faction.
They are the model of every other faction that's ever come after them, and still nobody's done it quite like they have, to be honest. Taylor, I'll let you jump in here in a second, but Will, I know you've got another engagement that you got to go to, so I'm gonna give you a chance to promote your show one more time, and then we'll let you get going to your thing.
Well, again, I want to thank you, BC, for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure of mine. Yours and Ted's paths cross. Taylor, we need to do it far more often, my friend.
Oh yeah.
I'll be sliding in those DMs. But if you want to find my shenanigans anywhere, find me at the Will Gray. You can find my link tree or Twitter bios. You'll find all my shenanigans for botch spots and chair shots and all my dirt sheet writing there. And again, BC Hunter, it's always a pleasure when our paths cross. Ted, we need to link up and do that part 2 for long-term storytelling. We'll make it happen in the very, very near future.
All right, man.
Sounds
Thank you very
good.
much. Really
Thank you,
appreciate you
gentlemen.
coming on and joining us, and good luck with your special guest tonight.
Thank you guys very much. Y'all have a great evening.
All right.
See you, brother.
You too.
All right. Well, I won't keep you guys much longer either, because I'm trying to keep this. Well, I can't say short and sweet, but we'll try to keep it around that hour mark. But this has been a blast. Talk about all the good stuff about JCP, but there's one other thing that I want to talk about as well. There's some missed opportunities here with JCP and Mid Atlantic as well, and there's some drop balls, and there's been some tragedies and things like that. But I'll give you both a shot at this. Like, what are some of the things that stand out to you that maybe were some missteps, maybe things that were in control, maybe some things that were out of control? I mean, I can obviously think of something that was out of their control that really affected them that I've covered relentlessly on this channel, Mr. Magnum T.A., but maybe some other things. And Taylor, I'll let you kick off if you want on this one.
So I don't know if this is necessarily something that was like I guess you could say a drop ball. And I was kind of trying to work this in. And I'm kind of new to all this territory stuff. Again,
Sure.
enlightenment journey, you know what I mean? But I was reading up on it, and from what I understand, it wasn't so much that Vince bullied them into selling. It was more or less leaving the territory that they were selling in was a bigger mistake. So my guess would be leaving North Carolina and the surrounding areas was my biggest drop ball, because it feels like it's like, okay, we're going to leave here and we're going to go to New York, or we're going to go to Toronto, or we're going to go here. And like most people probably like don't know who you are. You got to think like, here's where I sell out at. Let me stay here. You know what I mean? Billy Joel has done 3 years at Madison Square Garden. Do you know why? Because they love him at Madison Square Garden. Not that he wouldn't sell other places, but the smart move is keep going to the same place until they're like, all right, we've watched you enough. Like, you know what I mean? Like you could play the game with like current NXT too. Like they know that in their home base, they're always going to have a packed house. Whether they have to give the tickets away, people are going to show up and they're going to be there, and you're going to see people in the stands. And they know that. So they do take these tours, but it's a risk because you don't always know what kind of crowd you're going to get, or you know what I mean? And it's just like one of those things that maybe he got pressured into, because it's like, if I don't do this, we're all doomed. But at the same time, he might have lasted 4 or 5 more years if he hadn't done it.
Right. Yeah. No, great call. That's been one of the things they've talked about in the past, is like, they didn't stick to their home base, and they started doing all these pay-per-views and these places that were not traditional NWA strongholds, but they were traditional WWF strongholds, and that really killed them. So yeah, great call on that one, Taylor. Ted, what about yourself? Anything that you wanted to mention?
Well, there's so much on the business side, but another thing that I guess I think about was going back to, we've really covered, and if you haven't seen it yet, go on Wrestling with the 80s. What if Magnum T.A.? Okay, that's a whole episode. We talk about that. But another one I think that they missed was before Barry Windham joined the Horsemen. I think he should have had I think he should have went ahead and beat Flair and got a little small world title run there for a little bit, because he was such a hot baby face, especially after Magnum had the accident. And, they needed some new people in there, and Barry come up, and I think that was a little bit of a missed opportunity. The other thing was the whole thing about, I wonder, even though it was great stuff between Flair and Ricky Morton, we've heard the stories from Ricky's side saying that, they were doing that because the Midnight and the Rock and Roll were outdrawing Flair and Dusty on these double shots that they were doing, in different towns. And you wonder, did that take away some of the momentum of the Rock and Roll Express there for a while? Because then as you get into that late 80s, you had the Fantastics come in, and the different ones like that were trying to replace that rock and roll. And probably one of the biggest things that I think was really missed, that Tony Schiavone has said over and over on his podcast, is they should have hired somebody to do merch.
Right.
Because that was one of the big things that people were going to Vince. They were hearing about, my downside is this and that, but my action figure is making me a lot of money, things like that. And when you really think about, like they were talking about the Rock and Roll Express, if they would have just sold T-shirts for them and things like that and posters and stuff like that, I think that was a real missed opportunity for them.
Imagine if they sold the "I broke his leg" T-shirt. Or whatever it says, or I broke Dusty's leg.
Wahoo's,
I broke Wahoo's leg. Yeah.
I'm not the best at this. Anyway, but like I said, imagine if they sold that shirt.
I agree.
You'd have one on right now, Ted.
Oh yeah, I would.
See? And that's the problem, is there's so many decisions that people are like, Vince did this, Vince did this, Vince did this. No, Vince just smart business his ass. Like, you can say what you want. Like, sure, I mean, he's a shark, but y'all ever watch Wall Street? That's the way you're successful in business, my guy.
Well, and speaking of Vince and that, it was everybody says, yes, he did these tactics and stuff like that were dirty. And I agree. Putting pay-per-views on the same time as the NWA stuff. But that was more in the later years, when it was more Ted Turner's situation, because everybody forgets the NWA, JCP after 88, that's now Ted Turner's baby. So, I was going to mention the year of 89, but really that's Ted Turner's time. When you had the great year of Flair and Steamboat and Sting and Muta and all that stuff. But you're right. They just stick to what you're good at. Because Vince McMahon was changing the pride. He was completely going after the young audience. And when I say young, I'm not talking 18 to 49. I'm talking kids. He was going after the kids. You talk about merch. That's what he was going after. He wanted to merchandise everything and have kids playing with that. So the NWA and JCP could have easily just stuck to trying to cater to adults, but still have your merch and stuff like that, like you talk about, and stick to that niche that you had at the time. Stick in your territory. Don't be going up to New York and Philadelphia and New Jersey and all these places. Stick down. If you can sell out, Roanoke, Virginia, or Greensboro, or anything like that, night after night, go ahead and do it. Memphis did that for years, and they did plenty fine. So that was a big one. I agree with you, Ted. The whole Barry Windham situation. I think they could have easily just had Barry step into Magnum's boots and do basically the same run that they planned for Magnum at that time, and Barry would have got over. And then you still could have done that heel turn that you did in 1988, which was fantastic, and still had that great run with the Horsemen. And then you have an even bigger story behind it, because you now have Barry Windham, who beat Ric Flair, as your heater in the Horsemen. And then there's always looming in behind. Well, is Barry going to get sick of this and turn on Rick and all that stuff, right? We talked about in our what ifs about Tully not getting a run with the title and not having that chance to really affect the Horsemen. Different things like that, Everything else, I mean, guys like Sting and Luger, I think they did fine with the paths they took. I think they turned Nikita heel right away was a panic move, and that probably you had a hot heel at the time. Keep him that way. Like I say, Barry could have came in and been the face, or even if you want to make the Horsemen good guys in that situation instead, and go with that route. I don't know, something like that. But you know, there's plenty, but I think one of the biggest things that really screwed JCP, and it's I'm not doing self promotion here. It's the whole Magnum situation. That was their guy. That was their future. That was going to be the big thing. That was going to carry them to the next level and compete against the WWF. And unfortunately, things happened and it didn't go that way. And they just weren't able to pivot and they weren't able to go in the right direction. But you know, that's what happens. But overall, I got to say, this was a territory that I look back fondly on. And when I want to just, if I just want to turn my brain off and just watch something, and I'm going to pick one territory to watch, it's going to be 1986. Jim Crockett Promotions is what it's going to be. I mean, me and you, Ted, we've talked about it. 1986 might be the greatest year in wrestling history. And it's no coincidence that we both think that about that, because not only did you have a hot WWF and Hulk Hogan riding high and Savage and all those guys, but you also had a hot Jim Crockett Promotions happening. And I mean, we're talking hot, white hot at that time. I mean, I don't think people have an appreciation of how on fire that territory was, but they're not cooking the sound on those shows on like a Worldwide Wrestling or an NWA Power. That really is how the fans are reacting to those wrestlers.
Yes.
They were bananas at that time. And I mean, it's just amazing memories. And so that's what I want to leave this with, is maybe what would be your most favorite memory from this time period, and what would you suggest to the wrestling fan who isn't as aware of JCB to go check out?
Well, I'm going to start this one because I feel like I should go ahead and get myself out of the way. You know what I mean? So I think my favorite part of this, and again, I'm not as established as you guys, and I don't have years and years into this, but I hearken to a time when wrestlers had items that they carried with them that were synonymous with the wrestler. Like I was watching Ivan Koloff earlier, and he's carrying around a chain. Don't you get that? There's just nothing better than that. Why don't wrestlers carry around a special item anymore? Like you used to have the shillelagh with oh geez, what's his name? Finley, that's right. I'm sorry, I went blank there for a minute. It's just that's a thing that we don't do anymore. I missed that. I missed Ivan carrying around a chain, and damn was he scary with that chain. Not a guy I want to meet in a back alley. Whoo boy. That dude hit you so quick he wouldn't even think about it. He'd be like, hey Ivan, bang! I was just saying hi. Chill out, man. Dang, you know, he's swing that chain so quick, you don't even think about it. Also, his promos, very scary. Can't understand a lot of what he says. Very scary.
Indeed.
Was he really Russian? Was he faking Russian?
No, he's from Montreal.
Okay.
He's from Canada. Yeah. And he did win the title in WWF at one time.
Yeah.
He beat Bruno.
He beat Bruno.
Yep.
Was he always a heel? Did he ever play face? Because I can't imagine him as a face.
Not that I know of.
That's gotta be like, is there ever like, there's not that many of these all-time heels anymore either that just stay heels for their whole lives. You know what I mean? Like that's a non-existent thing as well. He's a forever heel. I can't think of that many wrestlers that have been heels their entire career.
I agree.
Yeah.
Except for Ted.
I think for me, the moment, again, 86 was, and I can't narrow it down to one, but besides the Horseman Dusty stuff, what stands out in my mind was going into that summer with that Great American Bash tour. They were doing something different. And the promos that Flair had to cut, because, you know, it was like 14 days, 14 different opponents almost every night. So he had to cut a promo on Dusty. He had to cut a promo on Magnum. He had to cut a promo on Ronnie Garvin, both Animal and Hawk and Ricky Morton. And he was just cutting promo after promo, week after, you know, trying to get them all in. And it was just like, how can he do this? You know, that just always stood out in my mind. Like, man, somebody's going to end up beating him if he ain't careful, because this is just a lot of people in a short amount of time. But, you know, he just kept doing it over and over. And I don't know, that whole Great American Bash, even though it didn't make them money, and they tried to do, that was another thing, they tried to do too big of stadiums that they weren't equipped for, and some of that stuff, but still just that vibe that we're taking this on the road. I don't know, that just always stood out to me.
I agree. That's one that sticks out in my mind too. Just that whole time period. That was amazing that Ric Flair, not only was he doing the promos, but he's building these feuds in such a short time. When you think about how he built up Ricky Morton with the whole training bra incident and
Yeah.
broken nose and all that stuff, and then he's doing stuff with the Road Warriors and with Magnum and with Dusty and all these people. It's just fantastic stuff. Yeah. For me, I just say the same thing. Check out 86. Check out just the stuff that the Horsemen are doing. I love 85, the build up to the whole Horseman thing, and Tully Blanchard really coming into his own in 85. And if I gotta say, check out one thing, just if you're bored some night, you want to see some greatness, just watch Tully versus Magnum in the cage at Starrcade. That I Quit match.
Oh
was
yeah,
just
yeah, the I
magic.
Quit match.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of Ted's favorite matches. He's told me about it
It is.
hundreds of times. Hundreds of
Magic.
times.
Yeah. Drama at its peak, I gotta say, just the way it went. There he is. There he is.
Old Ray Trailer.
The old Big Bubba. I love it. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I could go on for 4 hours about this territory. And I mean, there's so much that we didn't go on, but I just wanted to have a chat, get people fired up, get them interested in going and checking out JCP. So I hope we did that for the viewers. I'd love for, if you're checking out this video and you've lasted this long, leave some comments down below your favorite memories of Jim Crockett Promotions and Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Are you in agreement with us? Is there something that we're missing? And I'm sure there's a million things that we missed for sure. But what was your favorite memories? Were you watching at that time? Were you watching it live? What was that experience like? Going back to Taylor's question, did you feel like you were witnessing something historic here, or was it just that nice, pleasurable, glee of watching great wrestling? But before we go, I just want to say thank you very much, gentlemen, for your contributions. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Folks, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to this channel and help us out here. But even more so, please go check out both Jaded Wrestling and The Heel Truth. So one more time, I'm going to let you guys pimp your stuff before we get going here. So Taylor, I'll let you lead off, and then we'll let The Heel finish things off.
Well, if you haven't already checked out Jaded Wrestling, do it. Last week, we talked about how we live in Florida, and everyone has a story about meeting Hulk Hogan. And
Speaking of the 80s.
Yep, that's the way. And then this week, I have another special guest. Dakota will be back on with me, so check that out.
Nice.
Wes Brooks is with Music Night.
I'm always pimping my stuff, so I want to shout out Will Gray again, Bot Spots and Chair Shots. You're going to get like 5 interviews a week. He's just interviewing everybody. And he's got some stuff there. So go on, check out. And then BC here. I mean, he's a humble man, but I mean, he's got this wrestling with the 80s. Listen, I want to see this. We need this one to go viral. This one needs to beat the What If Magnum thing. Okay, we need to get this thing going. Share it. Okay, just share it. Put it on your Instagram, your Facebook. Hit that little share thing. Copy the link. Send it to your grandma. Okay, grandma would love this. Grandmas love me. That's my #1 demo. Grandmas. Okay, I mean, just send it out there. Okay, you got that. You guys Wrestling with the Truth, where he has the sub series Wrestling with the War. He's got these shorts. He does great impersonations. If you haven't checked out his shorts, we're talking about Dusty Rhodes. Go on Wrestling with the 80s. Go on the shorts and watch BC's impersonation of Dusty Rhodes. You'd think Dusty was in the room with you, okay? And share that thing. Watch it. But yeah, check all this out. Check them out on Twitter, all these guys and all that. And yeah, just go back and learn some history, young people. Watch some old wrestling.
Anybody that comments the word Kernodle in the comments, I'll subscribe to your page and I'll like your stuff.
There you go. There's a challenge there. Comment, the code word is Kernodle.
Kernodle.
Dan.
For 20% off your Manscaped.
Dan needed it. Dan needed it bad. Don needed it. Don and Dan needed it.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. And for all the viewers and listeners, really appreciate you joining us. Subscribe. Ask for more content like this. This is only episode 1. We're going to be talking a lot of territories as we go. So really appreciate you joining us for this one and looking forward to the next one. Take care, everybody.